you know, the basics. I mean, you're, I'll combine a softball question and a hardball question. You have breadth legislative experience, and then your two opponents, and you're running against two people who spent their formative years on the south side of Chicago. What makes you the more qualified candidate than the two of them?
Well, you know, I think my let me think about how the best way to answer that. My entire adult life has been devoted to public service in one fashion or another. You know, as you know, I came to Chicago originally because I wanted to be a community organizer and work in inner city communities. After going back to law school, I came back and practiced civil rights law and representing groups that are building affordable housing. You know, my participation in civic activities in the city has been directed at issues related to the problems that we confront in urban schools, issues of joblessness, issues of homelessness, crime and safety. So I would say that probably over the last 15 years I've had a greater breadth of experience in a variety of sectors tackling the kinds of problems that people want to see tackled in the first congressional district. So that although my legislative experience is relatively brief, I think the experience that I bring to bear as an organizer, as a lawyer, and as a legislator, I think better prepares me for the kinds of politics that I think we're going to need in the future. And I think that the kind of politics I'm talking about are a proactive politics that are focused on not merely pressing a button and going along with the conventional wisdom, but rather being able to frame issues and debates in new and creative ways, being able to bring together institutions from various sectors, you know, the not-for-profit sector, the private sector, as well as government, to tackle problems. Being able to articulate some of the hopes and dreams of the community in ways that resonate with the larger population, and so allow us to build coalitions.
You moved to the south side when?
I was 23. So basically, I've lived close to my entire adult life in the south side of Chicago.
And you consider it your home now?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, my wife was born and raised 5 minutes from where we live out in the South Shore. You know, this is where we're going to be raising our daughter. You know, I joke with people that anybody who willingly moved from Hawaii to Chicago must really love this city,
right?
And is showing a greater commitment to the city than somebody who was born here.
But once you got here, I mean, when you got here, I don't know if you were planning, you know, right away to spend your adult life. But once you got here, what was it about the South Side that made you want to stay?
You know, the part of what attracts me about Illinois generally is I think it's a microcosm of the country.
It's the most demographically typical state.
That's exactly right. And so, you know, it's north, south, east, west, black, white, urban, rural, southern, northern. And for somebody who cares deeply about the country and the issues and struggles that this country is going through, you know, I can't think of a better laboratory to work on some of the pressing issues that we confront in a place like Chicago. So So part of it was an intellectual interest
Okay.
in the city. Part of it is probably cultural in the sense that my mother was from Kansas.
Right.
There's that Midwestern strain in me that makes me comfortable with Midwestern people. I like sort of a no-nonsense, tell it like it is approach to life. And having lived on both coasts, I think I can make fair comparisons. And I really do think that Chicago is a pretty straightforward town, and people speak their mind, and there's not a lot of, there's more sizzle, there's more steak than sizzle in a town like Chicago. So I like that. And I love the people of the South Side of Chicago. I just think that if you're interested not only in politics generally, but interested in the future of the African American community, then Chicago in many ways I think is the capital of the African American community in the country. It's very hard to find a more diverse African American community with such a strong, well-established middle class, but also a large population of people who are struggling. I think the issues that exist on the South Side of Chicago mirror the issues that exist in cities all across the country, and that's really a deep, long-standing concern of mine.
So you talked about being able to build coalitions with institutions, all over the place. Do you feel that the leadership in the South Side has been too insular, or?
I think I've got a picture of Harold back there. My partner, Chuck Miner, was corporation counsel for Harold. I mean, I think that Harold is an example of a coalition builder. It was difficult and a bumpy road, but I think his basic core vision and agenda, inclusive agenda, that sought to reach out beyond the African American community, to identify what are those universal issues that people can work together on. Where's our common ground? I think that that same spirit exists in the South Side. And I think there are progressive leaders like Jesse Jackson Jr., who I think are trying to articulate that same vision. But I think, what I do think is that Congressman Rush, I think, exemplifies a politics that is reactive, that waits for crises to happen and then holds a press conference and says, "Isn't this a crisis?" And he hasn't been particularly effective in building broad-based coalitions on issues. I think his mayoral race was an example of the lack of capacity to do that. Now, in fairness to him, I don't think anybody could have beaten Mayor Daley in this last election. The economy is doing wonderfully. The city looks great.
That he wasn't able to build any kind of coalition outside the black community.
It wasn't even close, right? I mean, there wasn't even, it didn't even appear that there was a serious attempt to do so. And I think that, my basic premise is that, if you're representing any community, let's take the first congressional district. It's a majority African-American district.
Yeah.
Your first obligation is to look out for the interests of constituents in that district. There are certain issues that are non-negotiable and may necessarily bring you into conflict with the broader community. I've introduced legislation on issues of racial profiling that are of deep interest, obviously, to the African American community. I think there may be issues of police misconduct that disproportionately impact the African American community. practice civil rights law and employment discrimination law, so nobody's more cognizant of the fact that there are racial barriers to progress that continue to exist. What I also know, though, is that on issues of job creation, education, healthcare, we have more in common with the Latino community or the white community than we have differences.
Well, and you have to work with them.
And you have to work with them. I mean, just from a practical, political perspective. It may give us psychic satisfaction to curse out, people outside the community and say, blame them for our plight. But the truth of the matter is, if we want to get things accomplished politically, then we've got to be able to work with them.
You've been criticized by allies of Congressman Rush for associating yourselves with elite white institutions.
And I think that I think that is a fundamentally flawed criticism for a couple of reasons. One is, I think the implication is that because I went to Harvard and I teach at the University of Chicago, that makes me somehow an elitist. And I think that feeds into a certain anti-intellectual trend in the African American community that's of relatively recent vintage. Up until fairly recently, let's say, our parents' generation, the notion within the African American community was that education was this precious thing, and that you took that as far as you could, and you went out of your way to obtain this education because it would help you not only progress individually, but it would allow you to more successfully assist the community. And I think that Congressman Rush and some of his allies feed into what I think is a damaging trend that we see particularly among some of our youth and our young men, where the notion is that if you're well educated, somehow you're not keeping it real. So I object to that fundamental premise.
Right. But I mean, just the fact that you have, shown that you can work through the institutions, can this make you effective?
Well,
so that you can get effective when you go to Congress.
And I think it also makes me, I think it also, so one objection is just the message that it's sending internally.
Right.
But the second area that is flawed is just, the truth of the matter is that my experience working, being able to walk into a public housing development and turn around and walk into a corporate boardroom and communicate effectively in either venue means that I'm more likely to be able to build the kinds of coalitions and craft the sort of message that appeals to a broad range of people, and that's how you get things accomplished in Congress or in any other in any political venue.
Well, in your book, I got the feeling of you feeling kind of, in some ways, torn between two worlds, but it looks like this is a situation where that can be an advantage. You've been in both worlds.
Very much so. I mean, I think that, and this is borne out by my experiences when I'm out in the field. You won't see me speaking differently, giving a different message. Wherever I am, I'm pretty steady and pretty confident. But I think what is true is that people from a lot of different walks of life feel comfortable with me, feel that I have their best interests at heart. One of the things that my unusual background gives me is, I think, a great deal of empathy about other people, and I think people recognize that. I mean, if I'm talking to a white male or a black female or a Latino youth, what I'm trying to think about is what are those universal hopes, dreams, fears, concerns that motivate them, that impede them from realizing their potential. What's in them that's part of me? How can I understand their struggles better? And I think that is not only always been important in politics, but I think it's going to be increasingly important in politics because American culture is getting more complex and more diverse. And this is becoming a smaller world. Issues of trade and issues of foreign policy, I think, are more and more woven into domestic issues. And so I think that's a huge advantage. The other thing that's been interesting, and this is something that I've written about and believe more and more deeply the more I spend time out in the community talking to people, is that the African American community itself is this wonderfully diverse community, full of all kinds of strains and cultures and hybrid, and so I feel completely at home within the south side of Chicago, precisely because I think there's no I think we overstate the degree to which there's one particular way of thinking about particular issues and problems.
Your record as a legislator, tell me about some bills that you have introduced and seen through to passage in Springfield.
There are probably four things that I'm proudest of in the last 3.5 years that I've been down there. Not all of them resulted in bills with my name on them, although my fingerprints are all over them. My first year in Springfield, I was the lead Democratic negotiator on welfare reform. The Congress had just passed the 1996 legislation. We were charged with helping to design a state program that would actually move people from welfare to work as opposed to just cutting welfare rolls, which isn't that hard to do. You just stop sending people checks. They're off the welfare rolls. So, I worked with a number of advocacy organizations and to negotiate with Senate Republicans to make sure that we had a thoughtful, relatively non-punitive welfare program. And the result, I think, was a pretty good one. We don't have as good of a support framework as I'd like us to have in terms of, I'd like to see us have even more child care. I'd like to see us have a better job training system for people transitioning from welfare to work. I'd like to see them get even more transportation assistance.
What were you able to get for it?
Well, a lot of these are somewhat technical, but determining, for example, how many hours could somebody on welfare go to school without losing their benefits. There would be issues like that we would have to negotiate, where the Republicans were, and the Edward administration at the time, were more interested in just moving people off welfare and not providing them with training. The emphasis on trying to improve our job training system generally. We made sure that there were more dollars in job training and child care. So a lot of it was just sitting with the Republicans, with the Edgar administration, promoting good ideas, and trying to introduce some semblance of accountability in the system so that people were really interested in moving people into jobs and not just off welfare. And that's an ongoing process, There's a guy I've worked with pretty closely named John Bowman at the Poverty Law Project. Poverty Law state's attorneys had been pushing for a range of enhanced penalties for juvenile crimes, and then they wanted also some of it was just technical cleanup language, but there were a number of provisions where, for example, they wanted to be able to hold juveniles for 24 hours without charging them, and other modifications that would make it easier for them to prosecute juvenile offenders. They wanted additional powers to transfer juveniles to adult court. And I ended up again being the lead Democratic negotiator with the state attorneys to try to modulate their proposals and strongly argued for ensuring that we had prevention and intervention dollars.
What were the results you got? How were the proposals?
Some of the proposals were scaled back. Just as an example, I think the number of hours that they could hold a juvenile without that juvenile actually being charged. I've got to be careful about the numbers. This has been 2 years ago, right? But I think it went down from 24 down to 6. So there were concrete changes that they made as a consequence of our negotiations.
Okay.
In addition, we got $20 million in per year in prevention and intervention dollars that are now distributed across the state, whereby churches and not-for-profits can provide outreach programs for teens. My third year, I focused on campaign finance reform, and that's an example where the bill actually has my name on it as the chief sponsor. Okay. I was one of 4 legislators who worked with former U.S. Senator Paul Simon in crafting the first campaign finance reform legislation in 25 years in Illinois.
And what would?
The changes were basically to eliminate some of the most egregious practices that existed. I mean, Illinois, we were starting off with the least restrictive campaign finance laws in the country, probably. All we had were disclosure requirements, essentially. And there were certain practices that invited, if not actual abuse, certainly the appearance of impropriety. For example, it was perfectly legal for elected officials to use their campaign funds for personal use. So I could, get $1,000 from ComEd, turn around and use that $1,000 to buy my wife a birthday present, as long as I listed on my income tax.
And was that outlawed?
And that was outlawed. There was no ban on gifts from lobbyists, and we introduced a gift ban.
Okay.
There were no prohibitions against fundraisers in Springfield during session days. So it was common practice, where you'd have a fundraiser in the morning and you'd have to vote on issues that your contributors cared about that afternoon. And we tightened up disclosure. We required, and implementation just began this year, posting of electronic filing to facilitate posting of disclosures on the internet. So we didn't go as far as I would have liked, because I'm actually somebody who believes that both at the state level and at the federal level, without some forms of public financing, I think it's hard to corral the influence of money on politics. But we moved in, we took a step in the right direction, and did so, over the objections not only of Republicans but also Democrats.
So that's a big change for Illinois.
Yeah.
I mean, you must have been dismayed when you first came to the state. The political culture here.
Yeah, it's sees resistance among a lot of my colleagues, and I understand, the resistance in the sense that, the vast majority of politicians are not corrupt in any classic sense. But there is a culture in Springfield where, lobbyists buy legislators dinner every night, and they become close. And many of the lobbyists are very well informed and do a good job advocating the interests of the people they represent. But I think that shifting that culture was an accomplishment I'm proud of.
So does that still allow the lobbyists to buy legislative dinner?
We were not able to ban gifts. In the gift ban portion of the law, we had to, the only way we could get it passed was to exempt meals and golf. Have you
ever allowed lobbyists to take you golfing or pay for your dinner?
I am one of the legislators who, when I go out to dinner with lobbyists, I'll pay my own check. So
is that rare? No.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably one of 3 or 4 in the Senate who have that practice. Occasionally, it creates some awkward moments because occasionally you'll have like a group dinner with and it's a buffet, and then so I have to ask them, listen, bill me. And so usually what happens is at the end of the year there are probably 3. They'll disclose to me 3 or 4. $17 or $5 or something, and they'll send me a disclosure, and then I will write them a personal check.
But that's the kind of thing Paul Simon would do.
Yeah.
I mean, he would. People used to laugh at his annual disclosures because he'd write, somebody gave him a box of Girl Scout cookies. It would be on there, for like 250.
But I think it creates good habits, and I think that as a consequence, I think it's fair to say that if you talk to the insiders in Springfield, I think all the lobbyists respect the fact that I will make decisions on the merits. I'm proud of lobbyists will tell me, if we have to lobby something before you, Barack, we always try to do our homework and send the smartest guy we got.
So does this mean you get taken to fewer dinners by lobbyists?
Well, no, I will oftentimes accept invitations to dinner with lobbyists. It just means that I got to pay my own tab. So, a lot of times it means cheaper dinners. Okay, I can't, because a lot of times I can't afford some of the dinners that they want to go on. But so that was, I think, an important accomplishment. Okay. One other issue that I've been focused on a lot down in Springfield has been issues of tax fairness, because Illinois continues to have one of the more regressive income taxes in the state, or one of the more regressive tax structures of any state in the union, because we rely a lot on regressive taxes like gasoline taxes, sales taxes. There are a lot of fees, hidden charges, and we have a flat income tax. So very early on, I wanted to focus on tax justice issues, primarily because what I recognized is that with welfare reform, one of the things that has happened politically in welfare reform that's, I think, good, is that it desegregates the so-called working, deserving poor from the undeserving welfare poor. Now everybody's working and everybody's poor, or that is going to be pretty soon what the basic situation is. And that means that I think, and I think that's a good thing, because I think I'm somebody who believes that work is better than welfare, not just from the income perspective. It helps people order their lives and gives them a sense of dignity and purpose. But what that also means is then increasingly we have to focus on those issues that deal with people who are poor but working every day. And I think issues of tax justice are examples of that. I think there are other examples of that, like daycare and healthcare. So on the tax issue, I introduced two proposals. One was to increase the personal exemption, because the personal exemption at the time when I got down there was only $1,000, which meant that a family of four had to start paying state income taxes after they made their after $4,000, they had to, on the next dollar they earned, they had to pay taxes. Well, that's 1/4 of the poverty level, and they're already paying state income taxes. That didn't make too much sense to me.
So what did you want to see?
So what I wanted to do was I actually wanted to have my original proposal was to double it, but stagger it, so that persons at a higher, essentially what I wanted to do was get around the flat tax and create a progressive income tax. What is difficult, it's hard to do though because of the fact that we have a constitutional provision in Illinois that requires a flat tax. So what I wanted to do was have a progressive exemption structure, which there might have been some interesting legal constitutional issues, but the idea would be that if you were poor, you got a bigger exemption, and if you were well-to-do, you got a smaller exemption, and it phased out fairly rapidly. I wasn't able to successfully pull that off, but the Republicans did agree to double the personal exemption as part of the overall tax package that Governor Edgar introduced 3 years ago. Okay. So as a consequence, now families don't have to start paying taxes until a family of four makes $8,000 a year before they start paying taxes, and that saves these families money. I'm sorry, you got a question on that?
Well, keep going.
Okay.
Keep going.
And the second issue that I wanted to work on, and this is something that I'm still working on, and it looks like maybe this year we may be able to pull it off, is instituting a state earned income tax credit that would mirror the federal earned income tax credit, a tax credit that's a program that has probably been as successful as any in reducing poverty in the country. The idea would be to provide a tax credit that's 20% of what the federal tax credit would be, which makes sense because Illinois flat tax at 3% is roughly 1/5 of the tax brackets that most working poor are paying at the federal level. And I've been encouraged by the fact that after trying to move this through for the last 3 years, I actually now have the Republican chairman of the Revenue Committee as a co-sponsor. And apparently the Republican caucus is seriously considering this as one of two major tax relief provisions that they're interested in moving. Incremental progress, but real progress, I think, in creating a fair tax system in the state.
One of the criticisms I've heard about you on the campaign trail is that you haven't yet really, I guess, earned your chops as a legislator. And one of the examples that someone brought up was the veto override of the child support bill. That you, Julie Amos, had the responsibility in the House, you had the responsibility in the Senate. She got it passed, and you didn't, and there were a number of senators who voted present.
I think that's a ridiculous criticism of Senator Trotter. If you talk to Julie Amos or any of the advocates over there, they were. Here's what I accomplished in that situation. In fact, I think that's a good example of the kind of leadership that I've been able to show down in Springfield. Governor Ryan and Howard Peters, the Secretary of State at the time, or the Secretary of DHS at the time, Department of Human Services, were dead set against that bill. And the only reason it passed in the House was because it's Democratic controlled and Mike Madigan was willing to let it through. When it came over to the Senate, there was instructions from Ryan as well as Howard Peters to kill this bill in committee.
Okay.
The chairman, I'm the minority spokesman for public health and welfare. It came through our committee.
Okay.
The chairman, Dave Severson, instructed all his Republican members to kill the bill.
Okay.
In committee. And the Department of Human Services, the Republican Department of Human Services, vigorously argued against the bill in committee, and we still got it out of committee.
How many Republicans did you get with you?
Four out of the six, or maybe it was 3 out of the 6.
Okay. And what did you do to lobby them to bring you over to your?
Talked to them personally, brought in advocates to talk to them individually, and argued it forcefully in committee.
Which senators? Republican senators?
Dave Sullivan would be a good example, and you can call up Republican Senator Dave Sullivan and ask him about my leadership on that issue, and I think he would acknowledge that had I not been the sponsor of that bill, it wouldn't have even gotten out of committee.
Okay.
When we got it to the floor, okay, so first of all, the administration can't believe that the Republicans were convinced to let this out of committee after this was already targeted. You know, they actually put like a little arrow down, arrow up on all their bills when they come before the committees. And they, went against instructions. And I give them credit for that. Because I think that, and the advocates did a good job of persuading them that this was an important bill. When we got it to the floor, we had the votes and we passed it. Again, over opposition of the department was actively opposed to this bill, said so, and we still passed it with Republican votes. Okay. So we got it out. Now, it then gets vetoed, right? And it comes back. So now we need 2/3, and the administration is still objecting to it. And we lost by 1 vote. It actually went out. We had 37 votes. Okay. And then missed the override. We missed the override by 1 vote because John Cullerton missed the vote because he got stuck in traffic or something, and he wasn't there. And so we actually it won, and then Dave Phillips called for reconsideration. And now it looks like this year we've been able to compromise with the governor's office finally, and apparently they're going to give us, as opposed to 2/3 pass-through, they're going to give us 50% pass-through.
So how many senators voted present on the veto over?
I would say, a good number of the Republicans who were embarrassed about, who knew that this was, something they should be voting for.
Were these guys you had lobbied? I mean, the guys who voted present? Or
we lobbied all the Republicans. I mean, I think, as I said, you could call Senator Sullivan, who was a co-sponsor on this bill on the Republican side. Okay. And I think that he will tell you that, that's actually an example of precisely how much impact I've been able to have down there, where it looks like this year now we'll actually get something, and we finally convinced a Republican governor to move on an issue that they were dead set against.
What would that bill have done?
What it would have done is it would have encouraged. Right now, what happens is that the state of Illinois, if you're a non-custodial parent, and you are paying child support for your kid, or the state of Illinois is collecting child support from you, and say you put in $200 into the system. The state of Illinois will only give the custodial parent $50 for the child, and the other $150 will be divided between the federal government and the state government, supposedly to reimburse them for their welfare expenditures. And our basic argument has been this provides no incentive for non-custodial parents to pay into the system if all they're doing is financing the bureaucracy. Why would they want to get involved in this process? And so what we did was we designed the law would say that 2/3 of the money paid by the non-custodial parent has to go to the parent, as long as the parent is working. I mean, we restricted it to parents who are actually working because, what we're trying to do is encourage those parents who are really trying to work. They're trying to get off welfare, but they're still having a tough time making ends meet. At least get some of the benefits of the non-custodial parent's money, and also give the non-custodial parent a good, a strong incentive to actually make these payments.
Okay, and then what's the compromise you come up with?
Well, it looks like 50% will be passed. 50%. So now, if you paid $200 into the system, rather than the parent getting $50, they'll get $100.
Of course, the other example is, in fact, you're missing the boat on the safe neighborhood. Could you kind of talk about that? I mean, that week and what they tried to, I guess. I mean, the things that made it impossible for you to come back that week, and also whether you thought that the bill actually had a chance of passing.
Well,
you were in Wyman and your grandmother.
Right. I was visiting my grandmother. She's 80 years old.
She's your only living relative.
She's my only, basically. Well, I've got my sisters still living, but she's both my parents are passed away.
Right.
Her husband, my grandfather's passed away, so she lives alone in Hawaii. Every year we try to go there over the holidays so she doesn't spend the holidays alone. Right. Because she has a hard time traveling. She's got osteoporosis and a bad back. Okay. So originally we were scheduled to go on the 19th of December. The special session, we were down there for an entire week, going into the 22nd, I think, of December. So 3 days, I was already prepared to cancel the vacation, and I'd already called my grandmother that we weren't going to be able to make this visit. We would try to get out after the election campaign. On the 22nd, Governor Ryan announced, now we had already played around with, we had voted on 4 separate bills, and Pate Phillip had given every indication that he was not going to let this felony provision out. But despite that fact, since I've been one of the strongest proponents of gun control in the Senate, and was one of the leaders in floor debate on the issue, I felt obliged to stay. So we went through a variety of attempts to come up with a compromise. Finally, Governor Ryan gave up for at least before Christmas, and stated that we would reconvene the Wednesday after Christmas in a week's time. So that gave me the opportunity at least to make a very abbreviated trip to Hawaii.
So what day did you leave?
So we left on Thursday, the 23rd. Yeah. Right. So we left on Thursday the 23rd. It's a 9-hour flight with our 18-month-old baby. We get there, and we're there Thursday afternoon, Friday, Saturday, which was Christmas, Sunday. On Monday, I called to find out what's going on, and my staff informs me, well, it looks like there is in fact going to be session on Wednesday, because at the time that we adjourned, it wasn't clear that Pate Phillip was even going to call the Senate back. Okay. So at that point, I told my wife we're going to have to go back a day early. We were originally scheduled to leave, or 2 days early. We were originally scheduled to leave a couple of days later. And it's at that point that my daughter started getting sick, and we held off, waited to see what was going to happen. On Tuesday, she was feeling very bad, and was crying. And she's, if you know her, she's a pretty happy baby. And she was miserable, and we weren't sure at that point how bad this was going to get, whether, she was just had a cold or whether this was something more serious. And I had to make a decision, since flights only basically leave out once a day to get here on time. I had to make a decision on Tuesday morning as to whether either to fly out on my own. My wife and daughter didn't look, if they didn't fly out with me, and it turned out that they couldn't take our regularly scheduled flight. The next flight out was going to be sometime after the 8th of January. Now, this is working with American Airlines. They've already been working with her. So the issue was never getting a flight out, because a lot of folks were talking about how Governor Frank's staff said in the tribute, we offered to send a plane out together. Did they ever send a plane out together? That's nonsense. They might have, maybe they called my staff and said, listen, we'll send a flight out to get them, but the issue was whether I could get a flight out. Yeah. The issue was on Tuesday I had to make a decision as to, and I made a decision based on my assessment that I didn't want to leave my child and daughter, my wife and daughter alone without knowing how serious her condition was. And my assessment that that this was a largely political vote in the sense that either Tate Phillip was going to agree to a compromise, in which case the bill was going to pass, one way or another, or there were going to have to be continuing negotiations taking place. But my main, consideration was my daughter's health at that point, and I think that, it's one of those situations where, I was talking to Ed McClelland, former congressman, White House counsel, and he said, Barack, when I was in Congress, there were times where, you don't want to, but if your family is, at issue, and we put our families through so many sacrifices in this process anyway, that every once in a while you have to, make decisions in terms of what you think is best for your family, and I think that this was one of these decisions. Now, politically, I took a big hit, right? But your daughter couldn't afford. Well, this is one of those situations where, you make an assessment based on, you have an 18-month-old daughter who it turned out had a very severe ear infection, which is aggravated by changing air pressure. And I suppose she would have lived. Right? In fact, Senator Trotter was quoted, I think, in one of the papers saying, well, I'd understand if she had been hospitalized in the folks. Yeah. Well, I have, I guess, different standards in terms of, the point at which, my concerns are heightened. And you said they wouldn't have been able to come back until the 8th? They wouldn't have been able to, because, I didn't know how bad it was going to be. Yeah. If it turned out that she couldn't fly in the next 2 days, then the next flight after those next 2 days was going to be the 8th. Because now we're starting to get close to Y2K. Okay, hold on.
She'll be on too.
Sorry. But, so because it was close to Y2K, either I could have him fly on Y2K, potentially. But after that, from the 1st to the 8th, there were no flights. So my basic assessment was that it made sense for me to wait for a day, see what happened, see if she was okay, and then fly back. And that's what we ended up doing. Now, as I said, you came back on Wednesday. Came back on Wednesday. Right. And as I said, it turned out that my daughter had a bad ear infection that it took her about a week to get over. Did you think that bill had ever had a chance to pass, or did you think that it was, I guess, this was a showdown between Governor Ryan and Tate Phillip? I thought, when I initially went down there, I thought this was going to be a day's work. When we went, this is at the start of the special session. Right. I did not think it was going to be particularly controversial. And I also didn't think that we would, if there was some resistance to take Philip, that we wouldn't be able to craft some compromise that accomplished our ends. And we tried a range of variations. I mean, the ultimate bill that was voted on and still failed allowed for expungement and probation, and was designed to ensure that quote-unquote law-abiding citizens who, just made a technical error in how they stored their guns would not end up having a felony on the record. I thought that compromise would have been sufficient to move the issue. When I saw that bill fail, with Governor Ryan sitting right next to Pete Phillip on the floor, my conclusion at that point was that it was going to be very unlikely that we were going to be able to get this passed in the special session.
It was going to be off the Pete Phillip, and one senator's vote was not going to make a difference.
Well, my sense, Pete Phillip controls the flow of legislation, and when he gets a bee in his bonnet about an issue and decides that, particularly in this kind of public showdown sort of situation, it's unlikely that he's going to move things forward. In fact, I mean, what was reported back to me by various Republicans after the vote was taken was that as recently as the day before, on Tuesday, many of them were under the impression that he was going to send the bill into committee and kill it in the executive committee, which is what they had done. And he controls the executive committee, fairly tightly. And I think I mean, some of this is speculative, but I mean, certainly what's clear is that as soon as we got back for regular session, at which point only 30 votes were necessary. If it was going to be called, it would pass. Here we are, February 4th, and we haven't. It hasn't been called, and he hasn't let it out of the executive committee or the rules committee.
He's been on tropical island himself.
Governor Ryan went to Jamaica. Which I was a little puzzled by, but so I guess the point that I would make is that one of the things that you learned out of Springfield is that, and I'm sure this is true in Washington as well. There's a saying down there that no bill is ever dead. If in fact the votes were there to pass this bill, then it would have been passed by now. And that doesn't mean that I wasn't deeply troubled about missing a vote, because I do think that there's an importance of you being there to help move the debate forward, and if nothing else, just to signal to your constituents where you stand on a particular issue. So I regretted missing the vote, but this was one of those situations where sometimes as I said, part of the thing that I think is most significant about, or something that I'm learning is most difficult about politics is the toll it takes on your family, and it takes an enormous toll.
That was why you probably read about Robert Kennedy,
right? Deciding not to run up in the 10th district, and I respected him, and the any ambivalence that I feel about my life in politics basically revolves around my family. I mean, during the course of this campaign, I am out the door by 7 and I'm home by 9, including weekends. I have had maybe a day with my family, a full day with my family, maybe 3-4 days during for the last 6 to 8 months.
If you win, will you move into Washington?
I probably will move them to Washington eventually. I mean, I know that there's always these symbolic issues about, you become detached from your district, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that what people need to understand is that if they want to attract serious people to politics, values that I think ordinary people do, and that family is important, that you should look after your children, that you should pay attention to them, then that means that, their elected officials are going to have to make certain decisions that, make that possible even if they're serving in office. And so, I think that ultimately I would move my family to Washington, because the idea of trying to raise a child where I'm only seeing them on weekends, and during the weekends I'm having to run around and do a lot of public events, I just think there's no way to raise a child.
Well, you were talking about gun control, and I was at your event in Park Manor when you unveiled a lot of the gun control legislation.
Right.
And people were a little cynical about it, because they said, well, we already have this, we already have tons of laws.
Right.
What we need to do is we need to change the hearts of people. We need to change the culture. And and of course this is something that Congressman Rush is now talking about very much. What can you do as a congressman?
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's some legitimacy to some of these arguments. And I guess I'd say, to paraphrase Dr. King, I don't think it's a either or. I think it's a both and situation. I think that if you look at the statistics, the murder and violent crime rate in America is so much higher than anywhere else in the industrialized world that, and if you look at all the variables that are involved, the biggest single variable to that you can attribute this difference to is gun possession. Non-violent crimes in England are just the same as they are in the United States.
I just got a very good friend from Northern Ireland, and we looked at that has a reputation for violence. We looked at the murder rates. We looked at the murder rates here. We said, well, it's not nearly as bad over there.
Right, exactly. So some of it just it is undeniable that the pervasiveness of guns in this country contributes to violence. And if we can eliminate those guns, it doesn't eliminate violence, but it eliminates the most egregious results of violence. What is also true, though, is that, typically both in my announcement and in every campaign stuff that I make, and I think you saw that one at the educators event where I was talking about education. I do think that there is a values component to political leadership. I think we have to talk about values and individual responsibility and behavior. And that, I think, resonates with the understanding of ordinary people in the First Congressional District or throughout the country. We have young people who are far too tolerant of a violent culture and who glorify in media and music violence. More so, and I'm only 38, so I don't want to sound like a fuddy-duddy, but there is a substantial change in terms of the cultural norms that are presented today compared to when I was younger.
That's interesting, and I'm not sure if I totally agree with that, because I watched High Noon the other day. And that's a movie.
That's pretty violent.
And that's a movie that says sometimes you have to solve things with a gun.
Sure, and there's westerns and all that, but I think that and James Bond, we grew up with all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that my sense is that the culture is more pervasive for kids today. When I was growing up, now granted, I grew up for 5 years in Indonesia, so I was a little bit removed from it. But, you didn't have cable television, 50 stations, round-the-clock entertainment. My 18-month-old daughter, I already see, and she knows who Barney is, Elmo. She knows the characters of. I didn't have all this. So I think that the cultural penetration in the minds of our young people is stronger today. But beyond, I'm not sort of just making a simple argument that television is causing violence. What I do mean, though, is that there are a range of factors that are that don't just have to do with gun violence, but are exacerbated by gun violence, that has torn apart the fabric of communities and makes violence more of an acceptable norm than I think it was one generation ago. My wife, who's 2 years younger than me, so she's 36, grew up in the South Shore. She'll talk about how when they were kids, they just ran around in the streets all day long. They'd come in after dark. Nobody thought, anything of that. And this was not a fancy middle-class community. I mean, their parents were very much working-class folks. She went to a public school right in my current Senate district in what will be my congressional district. And the atmosphere on the streets were different. Parents felt less threatened, children felt less threatened. And part of it, and this is where it loops back to the issue of gun violence. I mean, I do think that part of what's happened is that the availability of guns among young people in gangs has made adults and parents fearful about monitoring activity in their neighborhoods. Every community objected to something, someone's going to shoot them. Every community that you go to, you'll always hear the same story about when I was growing up. If I did something wrong down the block, Mrs. Jones would come out and say, "Stop doing that," and we knew that if we didn't stop, she was going to get back to, mom and dad, and we'd get 2 lickings, one from, and Ms. Jones might get us a licking, then we might get another licking when we got home. Well, what I do think is that a combination of, 2 parents working in a household, so more latchkey kids, and the threat of gun violence on the streets, and the decline in some of the community-based institutions that sort of created a network among people. All of those things